I'm Russell Preston Brown, and this is Photoshop Archive. Now, this is the 35th anniversary of Photoshop, and this is a very special show. I've got Jeff Schewe with me. Wow. We both go back so far back in time, we remember the dinosaurs. But Jeff and I go way back to the beginning of time with the introduction of Photoshop, and that's why Jeff is here today. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, Russell, thank you very much for having me on your show. My name is Jeff Schewe. I am a photographer. I am an early adopter of Photoshop, although I didn't start until 2.0.
Is that right?
Yeah. I have 1.0, but the first photograph that was digitally imaged was done by me in 1984, 6 years before Photoshop even shipped. It was very, very difficult back then in the old days.
It was.
Cytex.
Yes.
People would charge $1,200 an hour, and they were slow.
Yes.
So what we ended up doing when Photoshop 1.0 shipped, I thought, I don't need to use the Cytex machine. I'll use Photoshop.
Yeah.
And the first Photoshop job I ever did was garbage for waste management.
Okay.
So I was a commercial advertising photographer back in the early days and used Photoshop, broke Photoshop, and then got to know Mark Hamburg, Thomas Nolan, the Photoshop engineers, and became an alpha and beta tester.
What year was this that you got to know the team at Adobe?
It was probably Photoshop 3.0 time period.
Okay.
And then I was an alpha tester for Photoshop 4.
You were extremely influential with what's happening inside of Photoshop, isn't that right?
I know how to push engineers' buttons. And what I was able to do is articulate to the engineers how best to implement a feature or a function.
So as a photographer, you're looking at it through that lens,
Yep.
and then giving them the information that they
Yep.
might need. And as programmers, they wouldn't have that knowledge of a photographer.
Although, to be honest,
Yes.
one of the best photographers that I know
Yes.
happens to be named Thomas Nolan.
Thomas Noel.
He's a very good photographer.
Therein lies an important factor to why Photoshop is what it is today, because the programmer, Thomas, knew so much about photography that he incorporated it into the application without having to look to others.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of it. He brought that knowledge to Photoshop from the beginning.
Do you know why Photoshop was developed in the first place?
I'm looking to the camera. No, Jeff, I don't know this. This sounds interesting. I want to know.
Well, let me tell you. Thomas Noel was working on a PhD on computer vision in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Yes.
His brother, John Noel, was a special effects supervisor at Industrial Light and Magic, ILM, also known as Kerner Optical. That's the sign that they had outside.
That was their secret code name.
Yep.
Yeah.
And John was trying to get proprietary image formats from one system to another system. And the file formats were off, and they needed adjustment for tone and curves. And so what ended up happening, John knew his brother kind of was pretty computer literate, and John asked Thomas to help him out. And he wrote a little app that eventually ended up kind of evolving into Photoshop.
What was the name of that app?
Well, the first one was a thing called Display.
Okay, so that's the first name of the first version of Photoshop.
Yes, although all it did
Display.
was open a file and then save it in a different file format. So what Photoshop really started out as is a file format utility.
Ah, okay. And what movie was John Noel working on?
So John Noel is famous for Star Wars. And one could say that Photoshop is a prodigy of Star Wars.
Okay. So it was the movie industry. Thus, Why did we get an Academy Award for Photoshop? Because it was a integral ingredient in the early days of movie making. And John's investigations and with his brother made it possible for many movies to come to life. The part I know about this story is that John's first use of Photoshop was to capture images for the movie The Abyss. And so there's a scene where this humanoid water element comes out.
I remember that.
And there are reflections in the room that had to be reflected into the 3D version of this water. And so John used Photoshop in The Abyss to generate those reflections and put them into it. So Star Wars and The Abyss together made it happen.
Well, the other thing that I'll have to say, and I know you're a humble fellow, but John Knoll talked to Thomas, his brother, and John thought, we might actually have a product. We could make this into a product.
And this is 1989?
88, 89. So John ran up and down Silicon Valley demoing Photoshop to all, although you know what the original name was?
I'm going to tell the studio audience the original name of Photoshop. This is a quiz question, yes?
Photo Hut.
Yes, Photo Hut. I don't think that was available.
No, it was not available. No. So what John did was he demoed it at Apple. He demoed it at Adobe.
Yes.
And John told me that Russell is basically kind of responsible for convincing the powers that be at Adobe that they should get this thing called, well, actually, they didn't know. Do you know who named Photoshop?
No, who named? You're telling me things I've never heard before. Yes.
Nobody knows.
Oh,
it happened in some meeting at Adobe. We can't call it Photo Hut, so we're going to call it
Photoshop.
Yeah, but nobody knows who named it Photoshop.
Brian Lampkin or
oh, no.
No. We got to go back to this point where I'm responsible for Photoshop being at Adobe. I like this.
Yeah.
So John Knoll told you that I was the key influencer that...
Well, you were an important influencer.
With John and Chuck.
Yes. Because you thought it was the greatest thing.
Oh, I knew it was the greatest thing. I too knew about Quantel paint boxes and Cytex machines, and they were like this distant thing. You couldn't quite touch them.
And expensive. So, Russell, have you actually seen Photoshop 1.0 lately?
No, not lately, but I actually started with Photoshop 0.8.
So,
whoa!
107.
There's my name.
Now watch.
Watch this.
I'm opening About the Photoshop, and there's the splash screen. Oh, don't look at my serial number. John Knoll, Steve Gutman. So I'm going to open a file.
Okay.
And this photograph is probably the most retouched and most visible Photoshop image.
There it is.
Jennifer in Paradise. And this is John Knoll's girlfriend at the time, turned into his wife.
And this was the demo image that he brought into Adobe in 1989. And this is the image I saw.
So here are the different menus, drop-down menus. And I got to tell you, if by today's standards of Photoshop 2025, look at the levels.
Yes.
Okay? You could make an adjustment, but you had to click the preview button to see it.
Oh, I'd forgotten.
Oh, yeah. I mean, so primitive. and then just take a look at different filters. There's an
those
unsharp
are all
mask.
Still there.
A lot of these were done by John. He has some coding skills.
Yes.
Take a look at the color palette.
Yeah.
And then I'll show you the brushes palette.
I haven't seen.
These are the only two palettes really in Photoshop 1.0. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to show you the clone tool, the clone stamp tool, the rubber stamp tool. What the heck is it called, Russell?
In those days, it was the clone tool. It was just a clone.
I think it was a rubber stamp tool.
Oh, okay. See, I'm getting confused in time.
Yeah. So, but you could clone things.
Just as today.
Yeah.
You'd identify it.
And you could use an airbrush Pick the color.
All of the technology is still there. It may look different, but under the hood, isn't it the same code? Isn't it somewhat similar code?
There are elements of the original code still there, I think. We'd have to ask John or Thomas. Thomas would know. But
Alpha selection.
so here's the selection. I outlined Jennifer.
There's no AI involved in it.
No.
In those days, we had to make a selection
Yes.
and draw and select around it. Listen, I'm watching this on a Macintosh in 1989, and I had only been behind a high-end
Quantel paper.
Quantel box, huge, expensive, and this was a miracle. This was an absolute total miracle to watch John doing this, and that's which motivated me to run to John Warnock's office and say that we have to do this.
Thank you, Russell, for doing that.
To empower the users with this much technology was such a revolution, such a big change that you could do this at home as a photographer or designer and be this, use these tools and be super, super creative on your own without telling somebody else to move the mouse for you. It was, wow, this was just shocking from my point of view as a designer at the time.
Russell, do you know why Photoshop was so successful?
Why was Photoshop so successful?
Reality sucks.
Okay.
The thing about Photoshop is it allows you to exert a control over what the image looks like, the tonality,
Yes.
the retouching. So that is one of the things that Photoshop did, was altered reality.
Had always altered our images in the darkroom.
Or even back in Curtis, going around photographing the Native American Indians,
Yes.
going from tribe to tribe. There was one particular shot. The chief had this clock,
Yes.
a prized possession. But Curtis thought that that was too modern. It didn't look native enough, so he retouched the clock out.
And is he painting it on?
I don't know.
Sometimes they
scratched it out.
Sometimes they scratch the negative, and sometimes they make a print, and then paint on top of the print, and then re-photograph the print. I know this because I did it myself back in 1973 when I was studying photography and I was admiring Jerry Uelsmann's work. I actually cut photographs apart, pasted them back together, masked them physically onto the piece of paper, and then re-photographed them to get the effects I was looking for. So the point is, the Knoll brothers took something that was very difficult to do and made it much easier to do.
Here's the other reason why Photoshop has been so successful.
Is this reason number two? This
And this is according to John Knoll again.
Yeah.
Russell Preston Brown. You did demos
Yes.
that were both entertaining
Yes.
and informational, and you made Photoshop look fun and easy to do. Whereas other software, I won't mention the titles,
No, don't mention them.
tended to have engineers do demos that were boring, dry, and not fun. But Photoshop is fun and easy to use.
I must admit, I'm not much into costumes.
No.
But I have to admit, my first demos at Adobe that were recorded, I was dressed as a cowboy. Oh no, the cowboy. I had a cowboy hat and a cowboy outfit. I think it was pretty ridiculous. But as you said, it was entertaining and got people's attention. In those early days, I was the first, we called evangelist or influencer. We didn't use the word influencer.
No.
And I would go to these events. I appeared on the Today Show, for heaven's sakes. Oh my gosh, the Today Show. It's 1990. I'm on the Today Show with Rick Smolin and Deborah Norville, and we're doing the demo. And I felt like a deer in the headlights. I was sort of stunned. Yeah. That video gets better and better over the years. It's like a fine wine. It's just aged. It's almost hilarious to watch that.
The other thing that I wanted to mention, this is the 35th birthday of Photoshop.
Yes.
But here's the question. Are you sure it's February 19th? 1990 when Photoshop 1 shipped? I did an article and I talked to all the people at Adobe.
Yes.
And apparently Adobe didn't have a historian 25 years ago.
No.
And I asked everybody, so what was the exact ship date of Photoshop 1? And nobody knew. Then I talked to Thomas and I said, Thomas, do you know when it shipped? Well, it was at the end of February, 1990. And I said, well, what day? So we went back and looked at February 1990, and he thought he was pretty sure that it was a Monday. So the Monday after the 15th was the 19th.
Okay.
So it shipped officially February 19th, 1990, according to Thomas Knoll.
There were a lot of products at Adobe. Why February? Photoshop on February 19th. Lightroom, February 19th.
Do you know when Camera Raw 1.0 shipped?
Wait, I looked at camera. No, Jeff, I don't.
So Camera Raw 1.0 shipped February 19th, 2003. And I was there, and so was Thomas. And it was the first digital download that Adobe offered. And it was for Photoshop 7. Remember this?
Yeah. It was
And-
the first digital download.
Yes, and it cost $99. Now,
Yes.
of course, it's incorporated into Photoshop and Bridge.
Photoshop's on February 19th. Camera Raw's on February 19th. You told me earlier Adobe Lightroom,
Yes.
February 19th.
So Adobe Lightroom 1.0 shipped February 19th, 2007.
Jeff and I were both born on February 22nd. Wow. February is an important month, isn't
Yes.
it? That's
It's
crazy.
important in the
Can we
world
just-
of digital
Let's just
imaging.
say that Photoshop was shipped on February 22nd. Should we just change this? No, we
Well, I
can't.
can talk to Thomas
We'll
about
work
that.
on that. We are going to hear the secret of Photoshop right now. This better be good. What is the secret of Photoshop?
The secret of Photoshop is there are many, many ways to accomplish a task. And it becomes confusing sometimes, frustrating sometimes, but there's almost always a best way. It may not be the way you're the most accustomed.
Yes.
And if you're used to doing it a certain way and it works for you, that's fine.
Yeah.
Here's another thing about Photoshop. In fact, all kind of computer applications. 80% of the people only use 20% of the features. And that's okay. Photoshop, Camera Raw, Lightroom,
Yeah.
lots of different ways of doing very similar things. And it's up to the user to learn what is best for them.
Yes.
And over the years, you've been a very good educator. And in fact, didn't you actually win an Emmy Award?
I have an Emmy Award.
An Emmy
for
Award.
education. Now, there's a twist.
So the thing about it, and one of my favorite people at Adobe is Julianne Cost,
Yes.
who is an expert at teaching people how to do things. And that's the thing. Now, in the olden days, when Photoshop would take 12 to
Was that the
24 months
60s? Okay.
between versions, what would end up happening is that it would take 18 months, and there would be a built-up demand, and all of a sudden a new version of Photoshop would launch, and everybody would go crazy trying to learn it, right?
Yes.
Books would come out, Photoshop World and Photoshop Conference, well attended. Now with the subscription model, it's incremental increases in features and functions, and it becomes more difficult to kind of keep abreast. And that's why I think Julianne Cost is wonderful.
The world was based upon the release of a version
Yes.
of Photoshop.
Yeah.
And everything was tied to that.
Yep.
And all the writers would get introduced to the early betas. They would start writing their books. Then the books would release. new features. I would go on tour. I would stand up in front of 2,000 people at Macworld in San Francisco. Now that's an experience because they all want to know that new thing about Photoshop had just come out.
Well, and if you remember Photoshop World, I'm not sure what year you got in, but I am in the Photoshop Hall of Fame.
Yes, we're both in the Hall of Fame.
2006. When did you get in?
You think I'm supposed to remember? No, yeah, I don't know what I had for breakfast.
Oh, I think you got in before me, which, would be justice. But yeah, so the whole thing about Photoshop and the feature set, not everybody needs to use everything in an application.
No.
And what you need to do is to find the best way to do what you need to do. And educational sources. And one of the best ways to learn how to use Photoshop, one of the best ways to use it?
I'm going to tell the truth is it's like a foreign language. You need to focus in and give yourself a project in Photoshop, something to achieve. I'm going to create a poster in Photoshop. You need to immerse yourself to learn it. Yeah. What's your answer to that?
The best way to learn how to use Photoshop is to actually use Photoshop. It seems so simple, it plumb evades people.
You put that quite well. The best way to learn Photoshop is to use Photoshop. I had the long version of that, but essentially it was there.
They'll use my version.
Yeah. I think people do miss that point. They'll say, I want to learn how to use this, but you just really have to force yourself to take on the tools and give yourself a project. Self-assign your project. I don't think people assign enough projects for themselves. I wanted to learn how to do portrait photography, so I look at others, what they're doing, and then I started taking pictures of myself because I'm a really good model. So, Jeff, there's a Photoshop Easter egg in every version of Photoshop startup screens, and you access it with some secret handshake.
Well, Easter eggs are just little things that engineers slip in as kind of a signature, It's a programmer's code to put in an Easter egg. Once you're in Photoshop, if you hold down the Option or Alt key on PC, and you go up to the About Photoshop menu, it will pop the alternative screen.
Even today?
Even today. And it comes up with an alt screen in honor of John Warnock, I believe. And one time it had Martin Evening, an honorary mention of Martin Evening. Chuck Geschke. And so the alt screen, now Photoshop used to have a lot of other kind of special things like Adobe transient witticisms.
Yes.
But one of the things I was going to mention is one of the favorite versions of Photoshop. Going back to Photoshop
favorite?
1. My favorite version of Photoshop.
Okay.
You know what it is?
Oh, I know this answer. It's Photoshop 5.
You're right. And you know why?
No, but that was a good guess.
Very good. I did the beta screen for it. You remember the...
Is that going to come up on the screen now?
Yes.
You did the beta startup screen.
The alt screen.
And the beta startup screens was a big thing. So each time we had a beta version of Photoshop, we designed a startup screen. And we put it in, and it had a theme. And what was your theme that year?
Well, it was a crate.
Yes.
With the birds flying at sunrise.
Yes.
And if you knew the name of the cat, Big Electric Cat, you remember Big Electric Cat, which is a previous version done by Joseph Kelter. If you typed UDO.
Wait. Okay, wait. You're in Photoshop 5. Where are you typing?
You hold on the Option key, click on About Photoshop, you get the Alt splash screen. You let it run all the way to the end.
Yes.
And if you hold on the Option key, it speeds it up.
Yeah.
And if you typed UDO, the top of the lid would flip up and it would burp.
Oh, no.
You remember that?
Yes, I'm remembering this now.
So this was, and Mark Hamburg had given me that opportunity, and I was also listed in the Photoshop credits for 5.
I want us to talk about our favorite features in Photoshop. We both go back to the beginning, Photoshop 1.0, and I know that you must have one of these favorite features that may still be around, and then you'll say one of your favorite features, and then I'll mention one of mine as well. But tell us your favorite feature, and it could be in photo. Some of the features are still there, but yeah, I think you know what your favorite feature is.
I know what it is.
So, Jeff Schewe, what is your favorite feature?
So other than the rubber stamp, clone stamp, whatever stamp tool,
Yes.
Photoshop history.
Photoshop
The history feature of Photoshop.
history.
And it's ironic
Okay.
because
You're the historian.
to a small degree, it was written for me. Mark Hamburg saw a demo that I did at a Seabold.
Okay.
Globe hands.
Globe hands.
You remember that
Yes.
image? Basically putting a globe around, wrapping it around a hand. And that was done in Photoshop 2.5 before layers. We don't need no stinking layers. What ended up happening is Mark Hamburg was tasked. One of the most asked for features was multiple undo.
Yes.
Remember this?
Oh, my goodness.
So Mark had seen my demo, and as engineers are often prone to do, why make something simple when you can make it really complicated? Right?
Yes. Yeah.
So he came up with the concept of saving states, multiple states in Photoshop.
Yes.
And so that you could do multiple undo, but you could also do paint or fill from different states. You remember this?
Yes. And you would target those states.
Yes.
Did we have to, say, record that state? Did we have to?
No, it was recorded automatically.
Okay.
Except for there was one thing. Mark sent me an alpha, and he wanted my reaction. And so one of the things that happened is the states would scroll up. And then the question was, well, how many states should be recorded?
Yeah.
And you can save that in a preference. But what ended up happening was that when you clicked on a previous state, the things that you did after that state went away.
Yes.
And I told Mark, well, where'd it go? He says, well, it's still there. If you click on the forward state, it's still there.
Yeah.
And I said, well, what if I wanted to go back and do something and then go forward again? And he said, oh, it's the solution to the grandfather paradox. You know what that is?
Yeah, yes. If you go back in time and make a change in time, the future has changed. And that's true in Photoshop history. If you go back in time, make a change, then it's...
Yeah. So the feature that he put in particular was allow nonlinear history. Do you know what that is?
That's where your grandfather does not die.
That's true.
If you kill your father. If you kill...
It's complicated. Anyway, you don't cease to exist if you go back and kill your grandfather.
Oh, yeah.
So that's time travel. Photoshop can do time travel.
I did like this feature because I could go back in time, get a brush, and then brush from the past into the future. Wait a minute, let me say that. Brush from the past into the future.
The future.
That was my Doc Brown coming back to me.
History was my favorite feature.
Yes.
What was your favorite feature?
Well, it's such a simple thing, and I'm going to ask you a question about this, the same question I asked Thomas Knoll. It just comes to levels. It's just so... the purity, the simplicity, the power of levels. I'm so old school, I still color balance images with levels. I go into the red, green, and blue channel. To this day, I don't use the modern way of color balancing an image. I love the beauty of taking the highlight point and the shadow point and the midpoint and adjusting them. I compare it to curves, and I want to ask you, I asked this question of Thomas Knoll. I've always wanted levels in Lightroom. And so I posed this to Thomas. I said, Thomas, there is a mathematical difference between the way you're moving the numbers with levels as compared to curves. And Thomas, you're right. There is a mathematical difference between the way the curves, the adjustments are made between those two. And profoundly, I'm going, wow. Well, and he almost agreed that Lightroom should have levels, and you can do more with levels than you can with curves. I ask you, the historian, the magician of Photoshop, what do you think about that? Is levels more powerful than curves?
Russell, you have a point.
Oh.
But the thing about curves, you have many, many points.
Yes.
And you can do everything with curves that you can do with levels, but it's not as easy because there are too many points.
There are too many points. Is that it? It's like me with photography. I only work with one light and my iPhone versus, 5 different lights on a portrait. Is that it? Am I just an old timer?
So, Russell.
Yes.
I should teach you how to use curves.
Yes, but that's the old theory. Do I want to drive down the left-hand side of the road or the right-hand side of the road?
Russell, I will promise you that levels will not be taken out of Photoshop.
No, I certainly hope it doesn't come out.
But I'm not sure that levels will end up in Lightroom.
Yeah. If you have a curves master, they can bend the curves and have S curves and drop off and open up the toe. They're speaking very as if you were a dot etcher in early
toe and the shoulder
of the curve. Yes, there is a lot more control there. So we have discovered here today that I'm just so ancient that I'm still using the stone knives instead of moving on to the brass Iron Age. I'm stuck in the Stone Age of Photoshop with levels, and I'm not ready to take on the Iron Age with curves. We're coming to the end of this, and it's been 35 years of Photoshop. It's been an incredible adventure. Both our lives have changed for this. My closing statement is that I am so blessed to be living right now at this time, to have come across Photoshop and these tools, Lightroom, Photoshop, this technology. Photoshop has changed my life, and I'm so excited that it was here so I could be as creative as I am today. Yeah, there's my closing statement about the 35th anniversary, and I'm ready for the 40th anniversary.
Well,
Jeff.
Russell, we've known each other for almost the 35 years.
Yes.
And the thing that strikes me is that, like I said, the history of Photoshop, one small app that changed the world, it changed the world.
Yes.
And an unassuming PhD candidate in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and a special effects supervisor at Industrial Light and Magic and Star Wars gave impetus to the creation of Photoshop, which for me gives me the ability to create photography and the art that I want to create. And it enhances and enables my creativity. And like I said, it's fun.
Yeah.
And kind of easy to use once you learn how to use it. And I know a lot of people don't like to sit down at the computer, but I sit down, listen to jazz piano, and work and I'll look and 6 hours have gone by.
Yes.
And I've accomplished and created something that I could not have done in the darkroom.
Yeah, absolutely. I got a final question. Is a darkroom still needed today?
Interesting thing, this new generation,
Yeah.
the hip new thing is Gen Z, they like shooting film.
Yes.
And they like the authenticity of a piece of film. So it's kind of a throwback.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you're shooting film, you need dark rooms.
Yeah.
The thing about today is that we have all this technology and all the tools to be as creative as you want to be and to create anything. So to a certain extent, this is the golden age of image making and photography.
Excellent way to close this off.
But the other thing I wanted to throw up,
One more thing.
and so February 19th, 1990
Yes.
is when Photoshop 1.0 shipped.
Yes.
We were all much younger, but looking at Photoshop 1.0, we have come a long way, baby.
Yeah. What keeps me at Adobe, why have I been here 40 years? I've been here 40 years because of the creativity of the teams that bring out the new features. It just astounds me, some new feature that's going to make me more creative and have more fun with Photoshop. That's the reason I'm here. It's because of the creative teams at Adobe.
You've been very, very good for Photoshop, and Photoshop's been very, very good for me.
Wow. Let's close with that.